Captain Jake Morrison stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. The room was huge, with seats for representatives from 47 different alien species. Today, all those seats were filled. The air buzzed with tension as beings from across the galaxy waited to hear what the humans would say. Ambassador Lisa Grant walked to the center of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. She carried a small data pad in her hands, but she didn't need to look at it. She had memorized every word of what she was about to say. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Lisa began. Her voice was calm but firm. "After 300 years of membership, humanity hereby withdraws from this council." The chamber erupted in noise. Some aliens clicked their approval. Others hissed in anger. The Chancellor of the Zephyrians, a tall blue creature named Vexthal, stood up from his seat. "This is because we questioned your violent ways," Vexthal said. His voice was cold. "You humans cannot accept that there are better solutions than war." Lisa looked at him without emotion. "We defeated the Krillian pirates who were attacking innocent traders. We saved thousands of lives. Your response was to call our methods too aggressive and demand we limit our expansion." A crystalline being that looked like living glass began to hum. This was how the Resonari showed agreement. "The humans do not understand peaceful solutions," it sang. "They bring chaos wherever they go." Admiral Ryan Cooper watched from the observation deck above. He commanded the human fleet and he had seen many battles. His weathered face showed no expression as he listened to the aliens speak. The slug-like gastropods wheezed through their breathing holes. "Finally, we can have true peace," one of them said. "No more human unpredictability." The insect-like creatures of the Hive Collective clicked their approval. "The chaos factor will be removed," their speaker buzzed. "Order will return to the galaxy." Dr. Amanda Price sat in the corner recording everything. She was humanity's chief expert on alien species. She had studied these beings for 20 years. She watched as one after another spoke against humanity. "You see us as violent," Lisa continued. "You call our methods primitive. You celebrate our leaving. Very well. But remember this moment. Remember that you chose this." The ethereals, beings of pure energy, flickered with what humans had learned was their version of laughter. "We pity you humans. You cannot evolve beyond your need for violence. The galaxy will be better without you." More species spoke up. The territorial saurians, who had fought wars for thousands of years, now praised the Council's peaceful ways. The warlike Branthari talked about meditation and harmony. It seemed every species had found peace, except the humans. Captain Morrison had been quiet during the entire session. Now he stepped forward. His uniform was simple compared to the elaborate robes and decorations of the alien representatives. But there was something about him that made the chamber fall silent. "You have made your choice," he said. His words were quiet, but everyone heard them clearly. "When the time comes, remember that you chose this path." The Luminar representative, a being of bright light, pulsed with what humans recognized as amusement. "What time?" it asked. "What could possibly threaten a galaxy at peace?" Morrison didn't answer. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. Admiral Cooper and Dr. Price followed him. Ambassador Grant gathered her things and joined them. As the humans left, the chamber filled with cheerful sounds. The aliens were celebrating. They talked about the golden age that was beginning. They spoke of science and art flourishing without human interference. They planned festivals and cultural exchanges. Chancellor Vexthal stood before the main screen. "Let this day be remembered as the day we chose wisdom over war, peace over violence. The humans may have their weapons and their aggression, but we have something better. We have unity," the crowd cheered. Some aliens had never agreed on anything before, but they all agreed on this. The galaxy was better without humans. Dr. Amanda Price paused at the chamber door. She looked back at the celebrating aliens. In her many years of study, she had learned to read their emotions and expressions. Today she saw something that worried her. They weren't just happy to see humans go, they were relieved. They were afraid of humans, and getting rid of that fear made them feel safe. But Amanda knew something they didn't. She had studied human history. She knew that humans had always been the ones to fight when others couldn't or wouldn't. Humans had defended worlds, stopped pirates, and faced threats that other species ran from. Now who would do that job? Outside the station, the human fleet waited. Hundreds of ships hung in space like sleeping giants. Each one was built for war, but they had been used to keep peace. They had patrolled trade routes, rescued ships in distress, and stood guard while diplomats talked. Admiral Cooper sent a message to all ships. We're going home. The Council no longer wants our protection. Captain Morrison boarded his ship and looked back at the Council station one last time. Inside, the celebration continued. The aliens were planning their peaceful future. They had removed the chaos factor from their perfect galaxy. But space was vast and dark, and it held secrets older than any of their civilizations. In the deep void between stars, things moved that these peaceful beings had never imagined. The humans had always stood watch against such things. They had studied ancient texts, prepared for unknown threats, and kept weapons ready for enemies that might come from anywhere. Now the watch was ending. The humans were walking away, taking their ships and their soldiers with them. They were leaving the galaxy to the philosophers and the diplomats, the artists and the peacemakers. Lisa Grant sent the final transmission to the Council. Humanity's withdrawal is complete. We wish you well in your peaceful galaxy. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, the Council station grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light. Behind them, 47 alien species celebrated the beginning of their golden age. Ahead of them lay human space, where former soldiers would become farmers and warriors would study art. The galaxy had chosen peace over protection. Time would tell if it was the right choice. 6 months had passed since the humans left the Galactic Council. Commander Elena Rodriguez sat in her office on the human colony of New Austin, reading reports from across the galaxy. The news was all the same: peace, harmony, and prosperity like never before. Trade routes that had been dangerous for centuries were now safe. The Council had replaced human patrol ships with cultural exchange vessels, lightly armed science ships designed more for talking than fighting. Somehow it was working. Pirates had stopped attacking merchant vessels. Border disputes were being solved with meditation sessions instead of battles. Lieutenant Ben Taylor knocked on Elena's door and entered with a data pad full of intelligence reports. "You need to see this," he said, setting the device on her desk. "The galaxy has changed completely." Elena scrolled through the reports. The warlike Brenthari had embraced something called peaceful contemplation theory, taught by the gentle ethereals. These were the same Brenthari who used to raid planets for fun. Now they spent their time building gardens and writing poetry. "Look at this one," Ben pointed to another report. "The Saurian Empire opened their borders for the first time in 2,000 years. They're inviting tourists to visit their homeworld." The Saurians had been famously territorial. They had fought 3 major wars just to keep other species from flying through their space. Now they were hosting cultural festivals and teaching alien children their ancient dances. Elena found more reports that seemed impossible. Fleet sizes across Council space had dropped by 70%. The money and resources that used to go to building warships was now funding art projects, scientific research, and something called Harmony Studies. President Katie Barnes was giving a speech to the Human Colonial Congress. Elena switched on the video feed to watch. Katie was reading from intercepted Council communications. "They call this the Golden Age of Cooperation," Katie said. "According to their broadcast, they've achieved what they call true civilization now that we're gone. They pity us for our inability to evolve beyond violence." The screen showed clips from Council educational programs. Alien children were being taught about the dark era of human aggression. The lessons described humans as a species that couldn't learn to solve problems without fighting. The children were told that the galaxy was much safer now. Dr. Steve Martin, a human historian, had been studying how quickly the Council was rewriting history. He appeared on the screen next to President Barnes. "They're not just ignoring what we did for them," Steve said. "They're changing the facts. Our role in stopping the Void Plague is now described as a joint effort with minimal human participation. Our defense of the Centauri colonies is called an unfortunate example of human overreaction." Elena turned off the broadcast and looked out her window. New Austin was a farming world, green and peaceful. Most of the humans living here were former soldiers who had chosen quiet lives after leaving Council space. They grew food, raised families, and tried to forget about the galaxy they used to protect. But Elena couldn't forget. She remembered the battles, the rescues, the times when human ships had been the only thing standing between innocent people and disaster. She remembered the grateful messages from alien worlds, the ceremonies honoring human sacrifice, the medals given to human soldiers who died saving alien lives. Now those same aliens were teaching their children that humans were the problem. A communication alert chimed on her desk. Elena opened the message and frowned. It was from the outer monitoring stations, the automated systems that watched the dark space beyond the galaxy's edge. But the message was corrupted, full of static and broken signals. "Ben," she called. "Come look at this." Ben studied the message. "It's from the Deep Space Array Network. But that's strange. The Council shut down most of those stations after we left. They said they didn't need them anymore. The few stations still running were maintained by humans who had stayed behind to finish their contracts. They were supposed to be monitoring for natural phenomena like asteroid swarms or cosmic storms. But this message looked different. "The signal is really weak," Ben said, "and it's using an old human military code. Someone was trying to send an emergency transmission, but it got cut off." Elena tried to contact the station that had sent the message, but there was no response. She tried 3 more stations in that sector. Nothing. The entire Outer Rim monitoring network had gone silent. Meanwhile, across Council space, the celebrations continued. The crystalline resonari had created new songs about the age of perfect, harmony, the slug-like gastropods. Were hosting philosophy conferences about life without chaos. Even species that had been enemies for millennia were now working together on art projects. The Council's new military organization called itself the Hegemony of Peaceful Worlds. Instead of battleships, they built vessels designed for cultural outreach and diplomatic missions. These ships had libraries instead of weapons bays, meditation chambers instead of battle bridges, and translation equipment instead of armor. Commander Rodriguez tried to feel happy about the galaxy's newfound peace, but something bothered her. In all her years as a soldier, she had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that something was wrong. She opened her personal files and pulled up a document that Dr. Amanda Price had sent her before the humans left Council space. It was a study of historical threat patterns, an analysis of how dangers had appeared in the galaxy over the past 10,000 years. The pattern was always the same. Long periods of peace and prosperity, followed by sudden, devastating attacks from unknown enemies. The attacks always came from the dark spaces between stars, from directions no one was watching. And they always caught civilizations by surprise when they were at their most confident and least prepared. "Ben," Elena said quietly, "send a message to Admiral Cooper. Tell him about the silent monitoring stations, and tell him I think we should start watching the Rim ourselves." Ben nodded and left to send the message. Elena looked out her window again at the peaceful farmlands of New Austin. Somewhere in the distance she could hear children playing and farmers singing while they worked. It was a beautiful, peaceful sound. But in the back of her mind she couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was built on foundations that humans were no longer there to maintain. The galaxy had chosen to remove its guardians. Now, as silence fell across the Outer Rim, Elena wondered what might be waiting in that silence. The celebration throughout Council space continued. Alien leaders gave speeches about their bright future. Children learned about art and music instead of war and strategy. Scientists studied philosophy instead of weapons technology. And in the dark spaces between the stars, something vast and ancient began to move. The colony of Theta Centauri had been quiet for 3 days. This was unusual because the mining world always sent daily reports to the Council's communication network. The automated systems showed everything was normal, but no one had heard from the 15,000 colonists who lived there. Captain Alex Morgan commanded the human settlement ship New Frontier, which was traveling through the Outer Rim establishing new colonies. His ship was filled with families and farmers, but many of his crew were former soldiers. When they received the emergency signal from Theta Centauri, Alex knew something was very wrong. The transmission lasted only 30 seconds. It was screaming, voices from 17 different alien species all crying out in terror at the same time. Then nothing. Complete silence. "That wasn't a technical problem," said Sergeant Maria Santos. She had fought in the Krillian Wars and knew what a massacre sounded like. Something attacked that colony. Chief Engineer Tom Bradley was monitoring Council communications. "The Council is sending a cultural outreach vessel to investigate," he reported. "They think it's just a communication breakdown." Alex shook his head. The Council's peaceful approach to everything would get them killed. Cultural outreach vessels were basically science ships with minimal weapons and crews trained in diplomacy, not combat. If something had destroyed Theta Centauri, Sending philosophers and artists to investigate was like sending sheep to hunt wolves. 3 days later, the Luminar commander Brightness of Dawn arrived at Theta Centauri with a crew of scientists and cultural experts. They expected to find colonists who had simply forgotten to send their daily reports. Instead, they found a dead world. The planet looked normal from space. Cities were still there, mines were still operating, and the atmosphere readings were normal. But when they tried to contact anyone on the surface, there was no response. No radio signals, no energy signatures from populated areas, no movement in the cities. Commander Brightness of Dawn led a landing party to the main colony. What they found made no sense. The buildings were intact, but they were empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. No furniture, no equipment, no personal belongings. The walls and floors were polished smooth as if everything had been scraped away. Stranger still, the planet's core had been mined. Not mined in the normal way with tunnels and equipment, but somehow hollowed out in perfect geometric patterns. The underground spaces formed exact mathematical shapes, triangles, hexagons, and spirals that went deeper than any mining equipment could reach. Dr. Lucy Foster, a human scientist who worked independently, managed to get a copy of the Council's official report on Theta Centauri. She read it 3 times, then threw it across her lab in disgust. The Council blamed natural geological processes for the empty core. They said the colonists had voluntarily relocated for better opportunities and simply forgotten to file the proper paperwork. The geometric patterns were described as interesting mineral formations caused by volcanic activity. Lucy knew this was nonsense. She had studied planetary geology for 20 years. Volcanoes didn't create perfect mathematical shapes, and 15,000 colonists didn't just disappear without telling anyone where they went. More worlds began going silent. Vega Station, a trading post with 500,000 residents, stopped answering communications. The crystal farms of Altair 7, where the peaceful Resonari grew their living architecture, went dark. The gas mining platforms around Wolf 359 simply vanished from long-range scanners. Each disappearance followed the same pattern. First, a brief transmission of screaming voices, then silence. When investigation teams arrived, they found empty worlds with perfect geometric patterns carved into their surfaces. The Council's reports always blamed natural causes or administrative errors. Commander Chris Jackson ran the human military base on Kepler 186F. His job was to monitor the border regions and watch for threats. He had been tracking the disappearances, and what he saw terrified him. The vanishing worlds formed a perfect spiral. Starting from the outer edge of the galaxy, something was moving inward toward the core worlds where most civilizations lived. The pattern was mathematically precise. Each world was exactly the right distance from the last one, and the timing was perfect. Whatever was doing this wasn't random. It was planned, calculated, and unstoppable. Chris sent warnings to the Council, but they were ignored. The hegemony of peaceful worlds was too busy organizing art festivals and philosophy conferences to listen to concerns about imaginary threats. They had achieved perfect peace, and nothing was going to disturb their golden age. The first visual confirmation came from a Council patrol ship near the Tau sector. The crew was investigating reports of missing mining equipment when they saw something impossible. A structure the size of a small moon hung in space near the mining platform. But it wasn't built like anything the known species created. It was perfectly geometric. A massive crystal shape with smooth, angular surfaces that reflected no light. Smaller versions of the structure, each the size of a city, moved around it in precise formation. The patrol ship watched as these smaller structures approached the mining platform. They didn't attack with weapons or explosives. Instead, they simply touched the platform's hull and began breaking it down at the molecular level. Metal, plastic, and organic materials were all converted into pure energy, which the geometric structures absorbed. The crew tried to send a warning, but their transmission was cut short. The last image showed one of the geometric structures approaching their ship, and then the recording ended. The footage was classified immediately. The Council ordered the crew to remain silent about what they had witnessed. Official reports described the incident as equipment malfunction during routine patrol, but rumors began to spread. Traders whispered about geometric shapes in deep space. Colonists reported strange dreams about perfect mathematical forms. Some of the outer colonies began evacuating on their own, despite council orders to remain calm. Dr. Lucy Foster compared the few available reports and realized something horrible. The geometric patterns, the molecular breakdown, the precise mathematical progression. She had seen references to all of this before in ancient texts that most scientists ignored. The references were fragmentary and scattered across thousands of archaeological sites. Most scholars dismissed them as mythology or primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena. But Lucy had studied them carefully, and now the pieces were falling into place. They called themselves the architects. They were mentioned in the oldest records of dozens of civilizations, always as something to be feared, something that came from the dark spaces between stars to correct what they saw as chaotic and inefficient use of matter and energy. According to the ancient texts, the architects viewed organic life as a mathematical error. They saw planets and stars as raw materials that were being wasted on random, chaotic processes like evolution and civilization. Their solution was simple: convert everything into perfect geometric forms and extract maximum energy from all matter. Lucy tried to contact the council with her findings, but no one would listen. The idea that ancient mythology might be real was too disturbing for a civilization that had just achieved perfect peace. They filed her reports under speculative fiction and continued planning their cultural celebrations. Meanwhile, the spiral of destruction continued moving inward. More worlds went silent, and the geometric structures grew larger and more numerous. The architects were harvesting entire systems now, leaving behind nothing but empty space and perfect mathematical patterns etched into asteroids and moons. The galaxy's golden age was ending, but most of its inhabitants didn't know it yet. The spiral of disappearing worlds had reached the mid-rim, and now even the council couldn't hide what was happening. Panic spread through the galactic communication networks as entire systems went dark overnight. Species that had celebrated humanity's departure now watched their own colonies vanish without explanation. Captain Danny Wright commanded the independent human vessel Lone Star. His ship was a converted merchant vessel that he used for trading runs between human colonies. He wasn't part of any military, just a civilian trying to make a living in the aftermath of humanity's withdrawal from council space. Danny was delivering medical supplies to a human outpost when his sensors picked up a massive energy signature near the Nexus Trade hub. The hub was one of the largest commercial stations in the galaxy, home to 3 million beings from dozens of species. It was supposed to be one of the safest places in known space. Captain, called his navigator, Julie Parks. You need to see this. On the main screen, the Nexus Trade Hub was under attack, but not by any weapon Danny had ever seen. Geometric structures, each kilometers long and perfectly angular, surrounded the station like a swarm of crystal insects. They weren't firing weapons or using explosives. Instead, they were systematically taking the station apart. Danny watched in horror as the structures touched the station's hull and began breaking it down at the molecular level. Metal corridors, living quarters, shops, and restaurants were all converted into streams of pure energy that flowed into the geometric shapes. The 3 million residents inside had no time to escape. Those are the same things from the reports, Julie whispered. The ones the council said were natural phenomena. Danny recorded everything his sensors could detect. The geometric structures moved with perfect precision, following mathematical patterns that hurt to look at for too long. They communicated through gravitational waves that his equipment could barely detect. And they were incredibly efficient. Within 6 hours, the entire Nexus Trade Hub was gone, converted into energy and absorbed. The beings responsible were the architects, though Danny didn't know that name yet. To him, they were just geometric nightmares that treated living beings like raw materials to be processed. They operated with cold efficiency, seeing organic life as an inefficient waste of cosmic resources. Meanwhile, former Admiral Pete Clark was living quietly on New Kansas, a human agricultural world. Pete had commanded fleets during the Krillian Wars, but now he spent his days growing corn and trying to forget about military life. That peace was shattered when his old communication equipment started receiving desperate messages from Council space. The first message was from Chancellor Vexthal of the Zephyrians, the same alien who had insulted human military doctrine during the withdrawal hearing. His proud voice was now broken and pleading. Human fleet commanders, if anyone is receiving this transmission, Please respond. The Zephyrian homeworld is under attack by unknown forces. We are willing to negotiate any terms for immediate military assistance. Our peaceful methods have proven inadequate. More messages followed. The crystalline Resonari, who had praised the galaxy's new peaceful nature, were broadcasting their most sacred harmonies on open frequencies, hoping to trade their cultural treasures for human protection. The gastropods, who had wheezed about, finally achieving true peace, were offering territorial concessions to any human government that would help them evacuate their colonies. Pete listened to message after message from aliens who had celebrated humanity's departure. They were all saying the same thing. Their peaceful methods weren't working, their diplomatic solutions were useless, and they desperately needed the primitive and violent humans to save them. Colonel Ashley Brown commanded Gibraltar Station, a heavily fortified human military base on the edge of human space. She had been monitoring Council military communications since the crisis began, and what she saw disgusted her. The Council's Harmony fleet was completely useless against the Architect threat. Ships designed for cultural exchange and diplomatic missions were no match for enemies that viewed their very existence as mathematical errors. Vessels equipped with libraries and meditation chambers were consumed as easily as unarmed civilian transports. "Look at this," Ashley said to her second-in-command, Major Carl Stone. She showed him intercepted battle footage, a Council cultural outreach vessel, trying to negotiate with an architect structure. They're broadcasting poetry and philosophical discussions while it tears their ship apart atom by atom. The Council's military philosophy had been based on the belief that all conflicts could be resolved through understanding and communication. They had designed their fleet accordingly, with ships built for long conversations rather than quick battles. Against an enemy that didn't recognize the concept of negotiation, they were helpless. Carl watched another clip showing a Harmony cruiser attempting to defend a refugee convoy. The ship's main weapon was something called an empathy projector, designed to help hostile forces understand different perspectives. The architects absorbed both the cruiser and the convoy without slowing down. 30 years of military experience, Ashley muttered. 30 years of telling us that our weapons were unnecessary, our tactics were primitive, and our military doctrine was too aggressive. Now they want us to save them. The requests for help were coming from everywhere. Not just military commanders, but civilian leaders, cultural ministers, and even the alien children who had been taught that humans were violent and dangerous. Suddenly, violent and dangerous didn't seem so bad when the alternative was extinction. Dr. Nancy Bell, the human scientist who had written about the architects years earlier, was now the galaxy's leading expert on the threat. Her research, which the Council had dismissed as speculative fiction, was suddenly the most important information available. Nancy had studied fragments of ancient texts from dozens of civilizations. The architects appeared in the mythology of nearly every spacefaring species, always described as geometric beings who came from dark space to correct the chaos of organic life. They don't hate us, Nancy explained in a broadcast to human colonies. They don't feel anything at all. To them, we're just inefficient use of matter and energy. They're trying to reorganize the galaxy into perfect mathematical harmony, and that means converting everything living into geometric structures. The architects communicated through gravitational waves and thought in terms of pure mathematics. They had no concept of art, culture, emotion, or individual identity. Everything in the universe was either correctly organized geometric matter or incorrectly organized chaotic matter that needed to be fixed. Colonel Ashley received the Council's final, desperate plea on a priority channel. The transmission came from what remained of the Council's leadership, broadcasting from an emergency bunker deep inside their most protected world. "Human military commanders," the message began. It was Chancellor Vextall again, but his voice was different now. Humbled, broken. "The Galactic Council hereby offers complete surrender of governmental authority to humanity. We will accept human leadership, human military doctrine, and human territorial administration in exchange for immediate protection from the architect threat. Please respond. Please help us." Ashley looked at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. She had watched too many human soldiers die protecting alien worlds. She had seen too many human colonies receive grateful thanks one day and condemnation the next. She remembered the celebration when humanity was forced to leave Council space. The next day, Admiral Carol Lewis, now the senior human military commander, sent humanity's official response. It was broadcast on all frequencies so every surviving Council world could hear it. "You chose this path," the message said simply. "You celebrated our departure. You called us primitive and violent while dismantling the very defenses that kept you safe. The humans walked away because you asked us to. Now face your judgment." The message was clear. Humanity would not be riding to the rescue. The species that had driven them away would have to deal with the consequences of their choices. But in the dark spaces of human territory, something else was happening. Ships were moving, weapons were being prepared, and strategies were being developed. Because while the galaxy burned, humanity had not been idle. The architects had consumed half the galaxy, and their geometric vessels now approached the core worlds where billions of beings lived. Massive refugee fleets fled toward the edges of known space, but there was nowhere left to run. The Council's remaining ships were overwhelmed, their peaceful methods useless against an enemy that saw their existence as mathematical error. General Mike Johnson sat in his command center on New Alamo, humanity's most heavily fortified world. Banks of monitors showed the destruction spreading across Council space. Every few hours, another system went dark as the architects converted planets, stars, and entire civilizations into geometric energy patterns. A priority transmission came in on the emergency channel. It was the Council's final desperate offer, broadcast from their last remaining stronghold. "Human leadership," the message began. The voice belonged to what was left of the Council's government, a handful of survivors hiding in underground bunkers. "We offer complete and unconditional surrender. Full governmental authority to humanity. We will accept human laws, human leadership, and human military control over all surviving territories. Please, save us." Mike had been expecting this message. He nodded to Admiral Carol Lewis, who was standing beside his command chair. Carol activated the main communication array to send humanity's response. "You chose this path," Carol said into the transmitter. Her voice was calm but cold. "You celebrated our departure. You called us primitive and violent while dismantling the very defenses that kept you safe. The humans walked away because you asked us to. Now face your judgment." The transmission ended. Across Council space, the few remaining alien leaders heard humanity's final answer. There would be no rescue, no last-minute salvation. The species that had driven humanity away would face extinction alone. But Mike Johnson wasn't finished. He turned to Colonel Frank Miller, who had been standing quietly in the corner of the command center. Frank was in charge of humanity's most secret project, one that had been running since the day they left Council space. "How long until the fleet is ready?" Mike asked. Frank smiled grimly. "We've been ready for weeks, sir. Just waiting for your order." The truth was that humanity hadn't been idle during their exile. While the Council celebrated their peaceful golden age, human scientists and engineers had been studying the threat patterns that others ignored. They had recognized the signs of the architect invasion long before it began, and they had been preparing for this moment. Dr. Paul Anderson led the research team that had cracked the architect's weakness. Working from ancient texts and the few battle recordings available, he had discovered something that the geometrically perfect aliens couldn't handle: controlled chaos. The architects depend on mathematical perfection, Paul explained to the assembled fleet commanders. Their formations, their movements, their entire existence is based on precise geometric patterns. But they can't adapt to genuine randomness. Human military tactics had always been considered chaotic by other species. Humans used unpredictable attack patterns, asymmetric warfare, and what aliens called illogical strategies. The Council had seen this as primitive and barbaric. Now it was the galaxy's only hope. Captain Jennifer Lee stood on the bridge of the human battleship, Texas Fury. Around her ship, a massive fleet hung in space, hundreds of vessels that had been hidden in the outer darkness while the Council thought humanity had retreated forever. These weren't the cultural exchange vessels or harmony cruisers that the peaceful species preferred. These were warships built for one purpose: to fight and win. "All ships, this is Admiral Lewis," came the transmission from the fleet flagship. "You know what we're facing. The architects have consumed half the galaxy, and they won't stop until everything is converted to their perfect geometric order. Today we show them what human chaos can do." Jennifer's tactical officer, Lieutenant Mark Webb, showed her the battle plan. It was deliberately confusing. Ships would attack from random directions, change course unpredictably, and coordinate through what looked like complete disorder. To a species that thought in perfect mathematical patterns, it would be impossible to counter. The first target was an architect harvesting fleet consuming the remains of the Vega system. The geometric structures were enormous, some the size of moons, and they moved in perfect formation as they converted planets into energy. Jennifer's ship dropped out of hyperspace along with 50 others, but not in the neat, organized formations that other species used. The human ships appeared scattered across the system, seemingly at random. Some came in fast and aggressive, others slow and cautious. Some attacked immediately, others held back. The architects tried to respond with their usual geometric precision, but human tactics made no sense to them. Just as one architect vessel moved to counter what looked like the main attack, 3 human ships would appear from a completely different direction. When the architects formed their perfect defensive patterns, the human ships would break formation and attack individually. "It's working," Lieutenant Webb reported as he watched the battle unfold. "They can't predict our movements because we're not following any pattern they recognize." One by one, the massive architect structures began to falter. Their perfect geometric forms, so efficient at converting matter to energy, couldn't adapt to the deliberate chaos of human warfare. Ships that had effortlessly destroyed council fleets were torn apart by tactics that made no mathematical sense. But humanity's real purpose wasn't just to win battles. While some human ships fought the architects, others were racing to the few surviving council worlds to evacuate refugees. The Tau Collective had remained neutral during humanity's departure, never insulting human methods or celebrating their leaving. When architect vessels appeared in their system, they found human ships already there, setting up defensive positions and evacuation routes. "This is Captain Ross Williams of the human destroyer, Liberty Bell," came a transmission to the Tau leadership. "We're here to help. Get your people to the evacuation points." The young Epsilon Federation had actually expressed regret when humanity left the Council. Their leaders had tried to convince the other species to find a compromise. Now, as architect harvesters approached their homeworld, they discovered human engineers had been secretly strengthening their planetary defenses for months. Not every species received human aid. The Zephyrians, who had insulted human military doctrine, were left to face the architects alone. The gastropods, who had wheezed about achieving true peace without human interference, watched their worlds burn without help. The Branthari, who had embraced meditation over military preparedness, discovered that philosophy couldn't stop geometric harvesters. But for those few species that had shown respect for humanity, or had at least not actively worked against them, salvation came in the form of human warships and human soldiers willing to fight and die for alien lives. The war against the architects lasted 3 months. It was brutal and costly, with human ships facing enemies that could convert matter at the molecular level. But human unpredictability proved to be the one thing the geometrically perfect aliens couldn't counter. Colonel Ashley Brown led the final assault on the main architect command structure, a geometric form the size of a small planet that served as the central processing unit for their invasion fleet. Using tactics that violated every principle of logical warfare, human forces penetrated the structure's perfect defenses and planted nuclear charges at key points. When the command structure exploded, the remaining architect vessels lost coordination. Some retreated into dark space, others simply shut down. The invasion was over, but so was the galaxy as anyone remembered it. In the aftermath, a new government formed from the ashes of the old. The few surviving council species found themselves under human protection, their worlds defended by the same soldiers they had once dismissed as primitive and violent. Admiral Mike Johnson became the first human governor-general of the surviving galactic territories. His first act was to establish a new military doctrine. Every world would contribute to its own defense, and peaceful methods would be balanced with military strength. "We won't make the same mistake twice," he announced to the Joint Human-Alien Congress on New Geneva. "Peace is precious, but it must be protected. Diplomacy is important, but it must be backed by strength. We learned this lesson in blood, and we won't forget it." The new galactic government was smaller than the old council, humbler, and much more realistic about the dangers that lurked in dark space. Species that had survived learned to work together with humans as partners rather than attempting to exclude them. Children of the surviving species learned a different history than their predecessors. They learned about the balance between peace and war, about the necessity of preparation, and about the humans who had walked away when they were rejected, only to return when extinction threatened. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of dismissing those who stood guard in the darkness. And humanity would never again walk away from those who truly needed their protection. In the end, the greatest lesson was simple. Sometimes the price of peace is eternal vigilance, and sometimes the greatest mercy is the strength to fight when others cannot.